right, let's introduce Hubert. Hubert Liu. Woo! He was the first engineer and CTO at Rigor for 7 years. He's seen every part of the technical process required to scale a business to $4 million in ARR. Recently, Hubert has transitioned full-time to the Atlanta Ventures team, where he now supports companies in the Atlanta Ventures family and helps build helpful web apps for entrepreneurs across the Southeast. A great example is the Simple Strategic Plan, simplestrategicplan.com. When Hubert is not building software or spending time with his family, he's obsessively making the case that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. So welcome to the stage, Hubert Liu. Thank you, Hubert.
Thanks, Sean. We're going to talk about product engineering. If you guys haven't seen this meme before, if you ask somebody that doesn't know how to do software, like what they think it is, that's pretty much what it is. Like do some stuff and then there it is. So kind of like what John said about me. So I started at Georgia Tech many years ago, not too long ago, and I was doing computer science. Around my third or fourth year, I was like, I'm never coding for a living. This is the worst thing ever. Around 2009, I started interning at a company called Pardot. This is before Salesforce was attached to the name, and I worked on internal tools there. So when I graduated, I was like, oh, coding is actually pretty cool. Pardot was awesome. It was a very good culture fit for me. So I graduated, and we started this company called Rigor, where I was CTO for 7 years. So Rigor does web performance. So I just recently, about 6 months ago, transitioned into this role at Atlanta Ventures, where I'm now, like John said, working on tools like simplestrategicplan.com. So please check that out. So why are we here? So hopefully your revenue graph looks like that. And if it doesn't, then you can pretend it does for now. And there is a lot of things that happen when you start to scale your company. So a lot of these things are things that I've heard personally, and things like we're moving too slow, yet we're also moving too fast. And kind of like what we've talked about earlier today, things that worked at one stage don't necessarily work in the next. Your team and your company are going to go very quickly, and that can outpace your individual's growth as they try to catch up to the company. So what I want to do today is try to help you make sense of these changes as they pretty much happen to everybody. And this is kind of the equivalent of the how to understand your changing body talk that you give to your teenagers. So at Atlanta Ventures, we've defined companies within 3 stages. So the idea stage, where you're building your MVP. As you get customers and you figure out where you fit in the market, you're going to hit the product market fit stage, where you're working towards a repeatable business. And then as you figure it out and you can hit the scaling stage, you have an established repeatable business, and you know that for every dollar you're going to put in, where it's going to go, what it's going to do, and you know how it's going to be multiplied when it comes out. So there are 3 categories that kind of evolve as your team evolves in relation to product engineering. So the first one is your people, which is obviously your team. Your communication, which are going to be how your internal teams interact with each other, but also how your teams interact with your customers. And then the technology. So the technology is either your product itself, or it's the infrastructure that supports your product. So starting with the idea stage. So in this stage, you're going to have probably 1 or 2 engineers, depending on how technical your co-founders are, or your founders. And they're typically going to be self-starting prototypers, which are, they operate with very little instruction. You tell them to go do something, they go do it, they ask questions later. The CEO operates as your product owner, so to help drive the product. And then everyone does customer success and does support. So communication in this stage is probably the easiest out of all stages. This is the stage that we're most familiar with. So we're sitting we're sitting next to each other in an office, if you have one, and you're always talking, whiteboarding. You kind of just, if you have a problem, you just text the other person and say, hey, things are broken. Everybody knows the plan is because they're constantly doing it, or they were part of making the plan, and you're on calls together. Any feedback is going directly to your engineers because they're on the call with you. So in this stage, everything's very easy. So when we move into the technology, one of the questions that I get asked, and kind of a unique part of this stage, is that you don't have anything built, or you're building something. So you get the opportunity to start from scratch. So one of the questions they get asked is, what technology should I use to build my product? And the question or the answer always is, it depends. So kind of a cop-out, but really, you should pick the technology that you know how to use or you're most familiar with, or that is right for the job. So Ruby on Rails is a great language to work with, or a great framework to work with. Some people say it doesn't scale, but if you're hitting the point where it's not scaling for you, then you're doing really well, and you can worry about that later. So pick something that you're familiar with and you can be productive, not just what's new and shiny. Another thing with a technology that's really hard to grasp at this stage is that done is better than perfect. So don't try to make perfect stuff and have perfect code, and code quality will just have to go away for a while. And that's okay, because quality is not really defined yet, and you shouldn't be afraid to incur technical debt and deploy all the time. And whenever you finish things, just deploy it. So this is kind of a funny thing that I see Craig in the back of the room there. So I pulled this out of our chats from 2010. We sent 800 emails to a beta user overnight at Rigor, and that wasn't great, but in the end, it was fine. So the motto for this stage kind of is move fast, break things, and focus on learning and figuring out what your product does. So as we get some customers and we're hitting this growth and everything's peachy, we're going to move in the product market fit stage. The people in this stage, your team's obviously going to be bigger. You'll have more engineers, and they're not just going to be prototypers anymore. So you'll start to bring in some specialists, maybe a UI designer, maybe just people that are very knowledgeable in certain areas. They're not just jack of all trades anymore. The CEO is still going to drive the product, yet that person's going to get a lot of feedback from other people on your front lines, like sales and customer success. And speaking of customer success, you're probably going to want one at this stage. So somebody who's willing to put on the fire suit and jump right in the fire. Somebody who's kind of there to triage issues and own the customer experience. So communication in this stage starts to break down a little bit. This is a common question. What is engineering actually doing? And the reason this question is being asked is because we all used to sit in the room together before. We knew what everyone was doing because, like I said, we all planned it together. At this point now, meetings aren't including everyone, and product direction is not clearly articulated to everybody because they just didn't hear it. So they're kind of busy, doing calls, doing demos, and all that. So this is where your engineering team also starts to operate with a little bit more structure. So before, when we were just deploying whenever we wanted, whenever things got done, now we're doing sprints, and we're on either a 2-week cycle or 1-week cycle, or we're doing something like Kanban, and everything is just going to go a little bit slower because of this new overhead, and that's okay. So one of the issues is if we carry over anything from the previous phase of communication, your engineers are going to get a lot of direct interaction. So people, your first sales rep is always used to going to, Joe in engineering, and they're always going to say, hey, I have a problem with this thing. Can you help me fix it? Or, hey, somebody wants this new feature. Can we implement it so that we can close this deal? And this is going to start to get a little bit difficult and fragmented for your engineers because they're trying to juggle all these project requests with doing their day-to-day. There's fires here and there, so things are going to get a little hectic. The technology in this phase is going to start to be more mature, or you should at least try to get there. So something that's come out in probably the last 8 years or so is this DevOps methodology. It kind of means different things to different people, so depending on who you ask. But there's a bunch of phases here that help you develop this engineering process that's repeatable. The idea is that things are you're moving in a way that makes sense for everyone, that's empathetic, and that ensures quality down the line. So you're doing things like code review and testing. You're making automation things happen so that you're not constantly doing everything manually, and then you're starting to really look at product quality. So you're doing things like thinking about customer experience before you even start building the product. So maybe you're doing you're doing mobile first, or you're thinking about responsive views and all these things that maybe you didn't really think about before because you just wanted to move fast. In this point as well, outages are going to happen, and you're going to have a lot of customers that at this point that may not be happy about that. So when you get outages, you should tell people that an outage happened. So sending emails or this communication that kind of admits that something went wrong, this is the stage to start doing that. Doing deliberate releases is also very important. So as your company is obviously growing up and to the right, your salespeople are always going to be doing demos. You have on-sites, implementations, things like that. So you don't want to just deploy code whenever you want, because if you break your product and somebody's on a demo or on-site, even worse is that's going to be really bad. So you don't want to leave your people out to dry. So either schedule your deploys or at least check the calendar to see what's coming up so people know what's up. And the motto in this stage is move fast, develop your process, and try not to break anything. So now that we've acquired a bunch of customers and things are going great, now we're going to scale. So this is the stage where everything starts to get really awesome. So we're going to focus on things, and that's going to be very different than what we had before. So before, a lot of people, we had people that did a lot of things, and that was cool, and they just helped out where they could. Now is the time we want slow and steady engineers. We want people that are senior, people that know when to go fast and go slow. Kind of like Tony said before, like these are things that is kind of intuitive because they have a lot of experience. They know when to ask questions. They don't jive right into things, and they're going to help you ensure product quality and scalability down the line. One very important thing is technical leads are not necessarily your people managers. So if you had an engineer you started with, maybe they're not going to be the right person to scale and manage your team later on. Somebody who's doing coding most of the time and managing people some of the time is not going to do either one of them very well. So pick the right managers, get real engineering managers that know how to manage the process, and that's going to set you up for success down the line. Your CEO is probably actually now building, helping scale the business and doing CEO type things. So you're going to want a product team to help define the direction of your product. It helps you maintain focus and kind of shield everyone from all the deluge of stuff that comes through. So this is what the communication now looks like between product engineering and all the other stakeholders. The other stakeholders being sales, customer success, leadership, your customers. Before, your communication was one layer, so you were talking directly to each other, and now engineering communication now is 2 layers. So engineers are giving product updates to product, and then product is taking that information and distilling it to the rest of the team or customers. So these are things like timeline updates, milestone updates, and product is going to go take that and tell that to the rest of your team and educate them on what's coming out. And they're also going to help prioritize the requests and backlog of things that are coming in. So before, like I said, 1 layer comes to 2, and that's when it's like a game of telephone. Escalated support issues also now kind of shift. Instead of going directly to maybe the engineer that implemented the feature, that support issue should now go to the entire team. Because if it would be really bad to be the engineer that implemented the most popular feature because you're going to be fielding all the support requests. So instead, spread that out over your whole team. Do something like a support schedule rotation so that you can spread out that load. Also in this stage, knowing how to communicate your engineering velocity and process to the rest of the company is going to be very hard because before, people just saw features coming out and they're like, that's great, engineers are awesome, everyone's doing their job. Now you got to figure out what the engineering KPIs are that are going to measure the success of your team, and that's really hard. And that changes throughout every company, and I don't think there's one KPI that would actually be good for every single company. And these KPIs should help show the health of not only your engineering team, but also your technology and the product. So things like uptime are great, unless people don't care about that, but most of the time they do. And also in this stage, customer feedback is now not just directly put into the product. So if somebody says build X, you don't just go build X anymore. Now you go and ask 10 other customers, hey, would you like X, and what things would you like along with it? So that when time comes to build that thing, maybe you're building X, Y, Z, and that's better for everyone. So you're not spending all your time on just one customer. And now your product releases also include things like webinars and knowledge-based articles and how-tos and best practices and interviews with industry leaders on how to use this thing. So everything just takes a lot longer to get out. And that's why you should use a tool like Product Plan or some other product management tool that will help get everybody on the same page with releases. Your technology in this stage, like I've been saying, product quality is extremely important now. So these are things like look and feel, performance, the service of your customer success team. Like all of these things contribute to product quality. So you want to monitor the things that drive your business. So this is actually the status page for Rigor, status.rigor.com. So this shows you all of the some of the core systems and if they're healthy or not. And this is something like if you depend on email sending, you should be monitoring email sending, and you should be telling your customers how your email server is behaving. So be transparent with the with the public status page. It's cool to tell people if something goes wrong, but also it's cool to tell them that everything's green because that's more fun. And when you make when something does go wrong, if something goes red here, and you're writing postmortems, make sure you're doing it with action items. So people don't really care anymore that something went wrong because they think it happens to everyone, but they do care how you're going to fix it and not have it happen again next time. Also at this stage, technical debt and scaling issues are really going to hinder your productivity. So if you don't resolve them, you're basically piling snow on top of more snow, and eventually you'll have an avalanche. In this stage, practice fire prevention, not just firefighting. So let's try not to let these things slip through and worsen our product quality and trust. And we should do preemptive improvements to our infrastructure. So we should be looking at optimizing our costs for our infrastructure spend. So we're not just turning on new servers in Amazon, because adding more servers helps us scale out the load. And then look to improve uptime, because if your product doesn't work, then people can't use it, and then they get mad. So the motto in this phase is ensure quality, trust your process, and be transparent. So at Rigor, we developed these core values, and one of them was improve every day. So the goal of this talk is to help you improve today, right now. And here are some things which I think you could take home that may help you out. So the first one is all software has bugs, and this is something that Craig always used to tell me just to keep me grounded in the world. So it's very easy as an engineer to look around and see everything be on fire, and you're like, man, everything is broken, and we need to fix all these things. But really, all software has bugs, and it's okay to not have perfect software. So there's a balance between sloppy and perfect, and something that you should remember. Find that balance, and if you try to make perfect software, you're never going to release it. The next one is estimates are just estimates. So this little cartoon here says, for 5 days I've been doing nothing else but trying to deploy this effing application to our production environment. So sometimes things take longer than expected. If you go and ask an engineer in a casual conversation how long something will take, don't just take that number and give it to a customer. So if somebody says it'll take a week and you go and tell a customer it takes a week, now that engineer is never going to tell you an estimate again. So so let's keep that trust going. So on the flip side, as an engineer, if you get asked for an estimate, it's okay to ask for time to think about it. You can explain what you want and what you need to know in order to estimate, what you don't know, and how long you think it'll take to figure it out, and that's okay. The next one is be smart. So this SMART stands for specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-bound, and write goals in this manner. So if you create a ticket that says create email sending service, that's never going to get done, and you won't know the progress of that. So instead, if you make 2 goals to start that say, that have specific items that are measurable with an assigned person and a due date, now everybody knows how far this thing is progressing. So maybe that's a better way to do it. Technical debt can easily become unmanageable the longer you wait. So here's kind of a funny, very smart person on Twitter talking about how technical debt explodes. Knowing your team is also very important. So this doesn't just apply to product and engineering teams. This kind of applies to everyone. But people have different working styles and ways that they effectively process information. So if you know that your engineers are all very asynchronous and they want to get information via email, don't go and ask them a question while they're in the middle of doing work, because you're going to disrupt productivity. You're not going to get the answer you want, and overall, it's just not going to get. It's kind of a waste of time for both of you. So if your people like meetings, make a meeting. If they like emails, write an email. People have different working styles, and you should know what they are. To kind of quote or reference Paul Graham's maker schedule versus manager schedule, I encourage you guys to look that up. Basically, to summarize it says managers operate on hourly schedules, and makers operate on blocks of time. So if you schedule 2 meetings during a day, you've effectively cut a 8-hour block of time into small chunks, and it's really hard to get things done in a less than a 2-hour chunk of time for an engineer. So, it's really hard to keep progressing with your thoughts if you're always being interrupted. Another good Twitter quote is, don't make things harder for yourself. So if you deploy the day before Christmas and you have to debug stuff out of your parents' house, which I've done before, it's not that fun, and your engineers are going to suffer, client success is going to suffer, your sales reps are going to suffer because they lost prospects, and then the business is going to suffer because everybody hates their life. So this is my son. He He hasn't learned how to code yet. He's still trying to get out of a bag. So you can find us on Twitter at Atlanta Ventures. Stories.atlantaventures.com is a great place to find some entrepreneur stories. You can find me on Twitter at HCLIU, and then Hubert at atlantaventures.com is where to find me.
Let's give it up for Hubert.
Question.
All right, any questions? Go. A few over here. AT's gonna. Mike?
I was just wondering, for each of the phases that you defined, how you decide how many engineers you need. And part two of the question is, have you ever solved a technical problem by throwing more engineers at it?
It's funny. So I think it depends, kind of like it depends, right? You'll never know how many engineers you need for each stage. And that was actually one of the things I wrote. I don't know if you saw that on this slide. We should just hire 10 engineers to knock this out. So there's a thing called the Mythical Man Month, which basically means you can't. There are some things you just can't do by throwing more things at it. So that's kind of the non-answer. Is it depends. But do whatever's right for you. If you feel like you can use engineers, or engineers are hard to hire, so opportunistic hires are really great. So if an engineer does come on the market and they're really good, they probably won't stay on the market very long. So if you can find them, hire them. You have a microphone?
Hi. In your experience, does it make sense to get an engineer that you've started with the whole time that really knows the product in and out and transition them to a CTO role or get someone from the outside?
Again, the answer is it depends. It depends on what that person wants to do. This is kind of what I went through when I, as this first engineer. There are some times when you want to stay in the weeds and you want to keep being an individual contributor and do your work and do cool technology scaling things, and that's great. If that person wants to be more strategic and go into a leadership role, then that's okay too. I don't think that there's one track for senior people that have been with your company for a long time. You don't want to just put them in a management position because of just because they've been there for a long time. So you really need to talk to them and figure out what they want to do. I think Tony said that earlier with sales. It's pretty much the same thing.
Hey, in the three different stages, in the first two, you had the CEO leading product.
Right.
When it moves to scale, that now shifts to a dedicated product team. How do you get the CEO to be able to let go of those decisions?
That's a good question, and I think Craig's in the room, so I don't want to. No, I think it's and these what I was recommending is kind of a loosely defined thing. It's not the same for everybody. But I think that the CEO eventually will have so many things to do that you have to kind of put them in a room and tell them to, which is what we did with Craig, get things done and stop chasing shiny things and let somebody do it. So trust your team is pretty important. If they're accountable for what happens coming out of that thing, you should give them the authority to make decisions on those things. So, Rob, how's it going?
Hey, Hubert. What advice would you give to leaders who want to create professional development for their team, for their engineers, when it's specifically hard if you don't understand the craft, right? So, and maybe directed it more specifically to you, what have people done for you that created the most personal growth that then kept you sort of happy and engaged? Because basically we know that everybody wants to be growing. How do you help people grow if you don't understand their craft?
Yeah, good question. So one of the things is making sure they're attending conferences of their choice. Don't just send them to an industry-specific conference. Fortunately for me, the conference of our industry was called Velocity, and it had a lot to do with infrastructure and operations, and that's what I wanted to do anyways. So that worked out really well for me. But if your UI or UX engineer doesn't want to really go to that and doesn't get value out of it, send them somewhere else. And that really comes from them to figure out what conferences are best in their industry. The other thing I think is it's great to help them find a mentor, and it's funny, Rob, you were one of my mentors and helped me out through this journey. So I think finding a mentor that's willing to work with you and kind of give you advice, even if it doesn't exactly match your situation, I think connecting your engineers with mentorship and leadership from outside companies of different stages. We did one where we talked to a bunch of engineers from a Fortune company that was not anywhere related to what we do, but listening to their engineering process and understanding that other teams are going through the same things as we were was super helpful.
If you're trying to do something that's probably never been done before for a customer that's didn't expect to be served, what are ways, and you want good product market fit, what are some ways to work with engineers in the customer discovery process in ways that are constructive? And what are some of the don't do's when you're small and you've got this unusual vision?
Yeah, so one of the most important things I think is make sure your engineers are in front of your customers. It's very easy to build things in a vacuum and know that you think you know better than somebody else that's going to use your product as an engineer, because the customer really does come first. And if you don't serve what they want to do, like if you don't solve their problem, then the product that you're creating isn't going to be useful. And this kind of manifests itself in, hey, as an engineer, I created this interface and it's perfect. And then I look in full story and they're clicking the wrong place every single time. We should use that feedback to better the product, and that feedback comes from customers. So kind of knowing that customers are the ones that are using the product and they really do know, even if you think your design is perfect, you should go and seek that knowledge from the customers. Yeah, so I went on site a lot of times with Craig. I remember the first time I went, he told me I had to tuck my shirt in and wear real clothes, and that was shocking to me. But you learn a lot about the customer. They're not faceless anymore. They're not just reporting bugs. They're actually, you're getting really good value out of helping them. And then you have a face, and you're like, there's a face to them, and every time they ask you a question, you're like, oh man, that's John over there, and I really want to fix this problem because he actually was a nice guy. But when he wrote in that support ticket, he kind of sounded like a jerk. So it kind of that helps out. And then later down the line, we had this, one of our KPIs was we wanted to get all the engineers on site or having a customer communication in the quarter. So making sure they're on a customer success call, making sure they're on a sales call, making sure they're on-site implementations. Like all of these things really help engineers because typically a lot of engineers are very introverted. So you want to get them out in front of the customer and being able to understand their pain, and it helps create empathy.
So you talked a lot about the kind of the dynamics between making sure you pay down code debt and making sure it's perfect versus getting things out, and then also the communication aspect to make sure that others outside of the engineering organization know what's going on. I know that we always had a lot of discussions all the time about how fast to move versus how perfect or how to clean things up. And I know and I hear this when I talk to other people who are not necessarily technical. Could you share a little bit about the engineering side, the viewpoint, and kind of where that's coming from? Obviously, everybody out in the rest of the organization wants all the features today, and why can't we just have that?
Right.
And so how did you manage that?
Yeah, so one of the things I started to try to think about was how can I explain this situation in terms that all of the business can understand? So if the situation is our infrastructure, if it goes down, will affect 99% of our customers and we're going to lose a lot of revenue. That's something that everybody can understand. But if you say our CPU is spiking at 99% and we need to add more RAM, people don't understand that. So put it in business terms. Something that Edwin, one of our rigor mentors, always talked about was create a metric that helps describe your business. So with the with ICE, they talked about a request per second. So if that number goes up or down, you're making improvements or you're slowing down. So something that's engineering related, but is in terms of a business metric is a really good way to do that.
Let's give it up for Hubert Liu. Thank you, Hubert.